I surprised my husband and his parents with a luxury Caribbean vacation. On the way to the airport, he casually mentioned bringing his new girlfriend instead. His parents agreed. His mother smirked as they left me there. Little did they know, I secretly rebooked their dream getaway to a freezing Antarctic expedition. The look on their faces when they landed was priceless. I, 32F, thought I was being the perfect wife when I planned what I believed would be the surprise of a lifetime for my husband and his parents. After months of saving and secretly coordinating schedules, I had booked a luxury 7-day Caribbean cruise with first-class flights, ocean view suites, and all the premium amenities I could afford. The plan was simple: surprise them with the trip as a celebration of our 3rd wedding anniversary and his father's retirement. The morning of departure, I could barely contain my excitement as I loaded our suitcases into the car. I had packed everything perfectly, even including his favorite cologne and the new swim shorts I'd bought him weeks earlier. His parents arrived at our house right on schedule, and I announced the surprise with genuine joy, presenting them with the boarding passes and itinerary I'd spent hours perfecting. The reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of excitement, I noticed an uncomfortable exchange of glances between my husband and his mother. His father seemed pleased enough, but there was something off about the whole dynamic that I couldn't quite place. As we drove toward the airport, my husband casually mentioned that he'd been meaning to tell me something important. He explained that he'd actually prefer to bring someone else on this trip instead of me. When I asked what he meant, he clarified that he'd been seeing another woman for the past 6 months and thought this would be a perfect opportunity for them to spend quality time together. I felt the blood drain from my face as I processed what he was saying. His mother, sitting in the passenger seat, turned around and told me that they'd actually been hoping I would understand and be mature about the situation. She suggested that I could simply drop them off at the airport and maybe plan a nice spa day for myself instead. His father chimed in, saying that these things happen in marriages and that I should consider this a learning experience. The casual way they discussed dismantling my marriage and stealing my carefully planned vacation felt surreal. When I pulled into the airport departure zone, my husband got out and retrieved his suitcase from the trunk. He informed me that his girlfriend would be meeting them at the gate and that they'd already coordinated her ticket. His mother actually smirked as she told me that this arrangement would be much better for everyone involved. I sat in my car watching them walk into the terminal, wheeling the suitcases I had packed, carrying the boarding passes I had purchased, heading toward a vacation I had planned and paid for entirely on my own. The betrayal felt like a physical weight in my chest, but underneath the hurt, something else was building. That evening, I called the travel agency I had used to book the trip. I explained that there had been a family emergency and I needed to make some changes to the reservation. The agent was incredibly helpful and understanding when I told her that the original Caribbean destination was no longer appropriate due to the circumstances. I spent the next several hours researching alternative destinations that would be available on such short notice. When I discovered that there was an expedition cruise departing for Antarctica the same week, with availability due to last-minute cancellations, I knew I had found the perfect solution. The process of rebooking was surprisingly straightforward. Since all the reservations were in my name and paid for with my credit card, I had complete authority to make changes. The travel agent helped me coordinate the new flights, which would route through Qley instead of the Caribbean, and the expedition cruise that would take them to the Antarctic Peninsula instead of tropical beaches. I made sure to keep the departure times and gate information exactly the same, so they wouldn't suspect anything until they were already committed to the journey. The beauty of the plan was that they would only discover the change once they were on the plane and the flight attendants announced their destination. The expedition cruise I selected was legitimate but decidedly different from the luxury Caribbean experience they were expecting. Instead of poolside cocktails and beach excursions, they would be experiencing sub-zero temperatures, mandatory safety briefings, and educational lectures about penguin colonies. I spent the rest of the week in a strange state of calm anticipation. I knew that somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, 3 people were discovering that their tropical vacation had become a polar expedition. I imagined their faces when the pilot announced they were beginning their descent into Santiago, Chile, instead of the Caribbean island they expected. The first contact came 5 days later. My husband called from what sounded like a very windy location, and he was not happy. He demanded to know what I had done and how I could have been so vindictive. I calmly explained that I had simply redirected the vacation I had planned and paid for to a destination that seemed more appropriate for people who enjoyed cold betrayals. His mother apparently grabbed the phone at some point and accused me of ruining their trip and wasting money. I reminded her that it was my money that had been spent, and that I had actually upgraded them to a more educational and adventurous experience than originally planned. Over the following days, I received several more calls and messages describing their Antarctic adventure. They complained about the freezing temperatures, the mandatory expedition gear they had to purchase, and the fact that the ship's library was filled with books about polar exploration instead of romance novels. The photos they sent, presumably to make me feel guilty, actually brought me more satisfaction than I had expected. There was my husband, bundled in borrowed winter gear, standing next to a penguin colony with an expression of absolute misery. His mother appeared in several shots wearing a bright orange parka that clashed horribly with her carefully planned vacation wardrobe. His girlfriend, who I learned was a yoga instructor who specialized in hot yoga classes, seemed particularly unprepared for the climate change. The pictures showed her looking increasingly uncomfortable as the days progressed, and I gathered from the messages that she was not handling the expedition experience well. Update 1. The situation escalated when they returned home. My husband arrived at our house demanding an explanation and threatening legal action. He claimed that I had committed fraud by changing their travel arrangements without permission. I calmly showed him the booking confirmations, all of which clearly displayed my name as the primary account holder and my credit card as the payment method. His parents arrived shortly after, and his mother was particularly vocal about her displeasure. She accused me of being petty and vindictive, and suggested that my behavior proved I wasn't mature enough for marriage. I listened to her complaints while sipping tea from the new mug I had bought myself, which featured a picture of penguins and the phrase, "Chill out." His father, interestingly, seemed less upset than the others. He actually admitted that the Antarctic expedition had been educational and that he'd learned quite a bit about polar wildlife. He even showed me some pictures of seals that he'd managed to photograph during one of their Zodiac boat excursions. The girlfriend situation resolved itself fairly quickly. Apparently, the stress of the unexpected polar expedition had revealed some fundamental incompatibilities between her and my husband. She had expected a romantic tropical getaway and instead found herself sharing a small cabin while listening to lectures about ice formations and penguin mating habits. My husband informed me that their relationship had ended during the return flight, somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. He seemed to expect sympathy from me about this development, but I found myself remarkably unmoved by his romantic troubles. Update 2. The divorce proceedings began 3 weeks after their return. My husband's lawyer initially tried to argue that I had committed some form of financial misconduct by changing the travel arrangements, but this argument fell apart quickly when my lawyer presented the booking documentation showing my sole ownership of all reservations. His mother made several attempts to involve herself in the legal proceedings, calling my lawyer's office and demanding that I be held accountable for what she termed vacation fraud. My lawyer found these calls amusing and assured me that there was no legal basis for any of her claims. The property division was relatively straightforward since we had kept most of our finances separate throughout our marriage. The house was in my name, as was the car and most of our shared belongings. My husband had contributed relatively little to our household expenses, preferring to spend his income on personal hobbies and, apparently, his girlfriend. During one of our final mediation sessions, my husband asked why I had chosen Antarctica specifically. I explained that when someone betrays you in such a cold and calculated way, it seemed appropriate that they should experience some actual cold to match their emotional temperature. The mediator, who had been maintaining professional neutrality throughout our sessions, actually smiled at this explanation. She later told my lawyer that in 20 years of family mediation, she had never encountered such a creative approach to marital dissolution. Update 3. 6 months later, I received an unexpected package in the mail. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures from the Antarctic expedition, along with a handwritten note from my former father-in-law. He thanked me for what he called the adventure of a lifetime, and explained that the trip had actually strengthened his marriage to my former mother-in-law. Apparently, Facing the challenges of polar exploration together had reminded them of their early years of marriage, when they had been more adventurous and supportive of each other. He wrote that they had decided to book another expedition cruise for the following year, this time to the Arctic, and that they would always remember the Antarctic trip as a turning point in their relationship. He also mentioned that my former husband had moved back in with them temporarily while he sorted out his living situation. The note suggested that this arrangement was not going particularly well, as he had apparently developed some unrealistic expectations about being taken care of that didn't align with his parents' retirement plans. The final paragraph of his note was perhaps the most satisfying part. He wrote that he had learned an important lesson about appreciating the people who make efforts for others, and that he regretted not recognizing my thoughtfulness and generosity while I was part of their family. I kept the photo album on my coffee table for several weeks, occasionally flipping through the images of penguins and icebergs. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing the visual evidence of my revenge plan's success, but more than that, there was a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the best revenge isn't about causing suffering, but about revealing people's true characters under pressure. The Antarctic expedition had shown my former husband and his mother exactly who they were when faced with unexpected challenges, and apparently, they didn't like what they discovered about themselves. As for me, I used the money I saved from the divorce settlement to book my own vacation. I chose a luxury resort in Thailand, where I spent 2 weeks reading books by the pool, getting massages, and learning to scuba dive. The water was perfectly warm, the staff was incredibly attentive, and I didn't have to share the experience with anyone who didn't deserve to be there. Sometimes people ask me if I regret my decision to change their vacation destination. The answer is simple. I regret trusting people who didn't deserve my trust, but I don't regret showing them exactly what they had lost when they chose betrayal over loyalty. The Antarctic expedition was just a metaphor made manifest. They had treated me coldly, so they got to experience what actual cold felt like. The best part is that every time I see a nature documentary about penguins, I smile and remember that sometimes the universe provides exactly the right opportunity for justice, even if that opportunity involves sub-zero temperatures and mandatory lectures about polar wildlife.